I still remember that morning as if it were yesterday. The sunlight spilled through our bedroom window, gentle and golden, touching the white sheets that once felt like a safe place. I had just finished folding Ethan's shirts, the scent of his cologne lingering on the fabric, that warm, comforting smell that used to make me feel loved, protected, and chosen. But that day, everything ordinary began to feel strange. The silence in the room was too thick. The warmth felt too heavy. And the air carried a whisper of guilt that I could no longer ignore. Ethan had left early for work. He always did on Mondays. I was supposed to clean the room before heading to my part-time job at the bookstore. When I bent down to tuck the bedsheet's corner, something hard and metallic rolled out from under the bed. I frowned and reached for it. It was a single silver cufflink. Elegant, expensive-looking, engraved with the letter L. At first, my mind refused to understand what I was holding. I turned it over in my palm, blinking at the tiny letter. L. My husband's name was Ethan. He didn't wear cufflinks. He never did. I had bought him a pair once, years ago, for our anniversary, but those were plain, gold ones, still resting inside his drawer. This one didn't belong to him. My hands trembled slightly as I stood there, staring at that small piece of metal that suddenly weighed more than 1,000 lies. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was from a friend who visited. Maybe Ethan had borrowed it from someone. But deep down, a voice whispered a truth I didn't want to hear. Because I knew exactly whose initial that was. Liam. The sound of his name inside my head made my throat tighten. Liam Carter. Ethan's old college friend. Our frequent dinner guest. The man who used to bring wine and stories and laughter into our home. The man whose eyes used to linger a second too long when I spoke. The man who had become the reason my heart started drifting away from everything I once promised to protect. I sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the cufflink in my hand. My heart raced, and my mind began to rewind to the nights I had spent remembering his touch, his voice, the way he made me feel seen again. It was supposed to mean nothing, that brief and forbidden thing between us. Just a moment of weakness, born from loneliness and 1,000 unspoken resentments. But seeing that cufflink under our bed, our marriage bed, made it real in a way I wasn't ready to face. The guilt that I had managed to bury so deep came rushing back like a flood. I pressed my palm to my mouth, choking on the weight of what I had done. I could still remember the night Liam had come over when Ethan was away on a business trip. I had told myself it was harmless, dinner, wine, and company. But it hadn't stayed that way. The loneliness had a way of blurring boundaries. And in that blurred moment, I had crossed the line I could never uncross. I stood up, almost on instinct, as if moving could undo what was done. The mirror caught my reflection, a woman I barely recognized. My hair messy, my eyes tired, my face pale. There was once a time when Ethan looked at me like I was his whole world. Somewhere between the years, that look had faded. Or maybe I had stopped noticing. Maybe that's why I let another man's attention fill the silence. Maybe I just wanted to feel alive again, but now, standing there, I only felt dead inside. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw that cufflink out of the window and pretend it meant nothing. But it did. It meant that my secret was no longer safe. If I had found it, Ethan could, too. I quickly hid it inside the drawer, my heart pounding. The sound of my daughter's voice from the hallway pulled me back to the present. Mom, are you okay? I turned around too fast, forcing a smile that felt like it cracked my soul. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just cleaning up. Ella stood at the door, her school backpack slung over one shoulder, her hair in a messy braid. She had her father's eyes soft brown, full of quiet kindness. Sometimes, when she smiled, it hurt to look at her because she reminded me of the man I was hurting most. After she left for school, I sat back down and tried to breathe. I thought about Ethan, about how kind he had always been. How he worked late, brought flowers without a reason, how he still reached for my hand in crowded places. I thought about the way he had trusted me, how his love had never wavered, even when mine did. The shame burned deeper. That night, when Ethan came home, everything felt heavier. The sound of his keys, the warmth of his voice, the way he kissed my forehead, all of it felt like a cruel punishment. I cooked dinner like I always did, smiled when he told me about his day, nodded at the right times. But every word, every look was laced with guilt. He noticed, of course. Ethan always noticed. "You seem quiet tonight," he said softly as we sat down at the table. I forced a small laugh. "Just tired." He reached across and touched my hand. "You've been tired a lot lately." I looked at his hand resting on mine, his wedding band glinting under the light. I wanted to pull away, but I didn't. I couldn't. Because even though my heart was drowning in guilt, a small, selfish part of me still craved his touch, the comfort, the safety. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The cufflink felt like it was burning a hole in the drawer across the room. I kept thinking, what if he finds it? What if he knows? I imagined his face, the confusion, the betrayal, the heartbreak. I couldn't bear the thought of it. The next morning, I took the cufflink out and drove to the river that runs behind our neighborhood. It was early, mist still floating above the water. I held it in my hand one last time. That little piece of silver had been the start of everything, and now it was going to be the end. I threw it into the water, watching it disappear beneath the surface, swallowed by the current. But what I didn't realize was that guilt doesn't drown that easily. It follows you. It breathes in your shadow. It whispers when you close your eyes. The next few weeks passed like a blur. Ethan grew quieter. Sometimes I caught him looking at me with that thoughtful expression, like he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense yet. One evening, as we were cleaning the kitchen, he suddenly said, "Liam's been acting strange lately. Have you noticed?" My heart stuttered. "Strange." I tried to sound casual. He nodded, wiping his hands on a towel. "He avoids eye contact. And when I mentioned you the other day, he changed the subject." I forced a small laugh, my stomach turning. "Maybe he's just busy." Ethan shrugged, but I could tell he didn't quite believe it. That night, I went to bed before him. I pretended to be asleep when he walked in. Through half-closed eyes, I saw him standing by the dresser, the same one where I had hidden the cufflink weeks ago. He opened the drawer, looked around, then quietly closed it. His face was unreadable. When he finally climbed into bed beside me, he didn't reach for me like he usually did. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling. That was the night I realized something had changed. The silence between us was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, loaded with things unsaid. I knew then that he had started to suspect, and I knew deep down that this was only the beginning of the storm I had created. The days that followed felt like walking through fog, quiet, shapeless, and full of things I couldn't see, but could feel pressing in from every side. Ethan and I still lived under the same roof, still ate at the same table, still exchanged the same polite smiles. But there was something invisible between us now, something colder than silence, heavier than words. He had stopped asking where I went during the day. He stopped checking if I'd eaten or calling me from work just to hear my voice. At first, I told myself it was just my imagination, that he was stressed, tired, distracted. But then I began to notice the little things, the way he'd pause before answering me, the way his eyes would follow me when he thought I wasn't looking. It wasn't anger in his gaze. It was something worse, distance. There is nothing louder than the silence between two people who used to love each other. Every sound in the house seemed to echo differently now. The clatter of dishes, the creak of the wooden stairs, even the ticking of the clock, they all reminded me of what used to fill the space between those sounds: laughter, small talk, affection. Now it was just quiet. I tried to mend it in small ways. I made his favorite meals. I asked about his day. I put on the blue dress he once said made me look like the ocean. But he didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did and chose not to respond. He still kissed me goodbye before leaving for work, but his lips barely touched my cheek. There was no warmth. Just habit. One afternoon, I found myself sitting by the kitchen window, watching the rain slide down the glass. The house smelled like coffee and rain, that bittersweet mix that used to make me feel calm. But now it only made me restless. I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to confess everything, to beg for forgiveness, to tear down the wall between us. But then I'd think of Ella. I'd think of what it would do to her, to see her family fall apart. So I kept my secret buried. And the silence kept growing roots between us. A week later, Ethan came home early. I heard the door open, then closed softly. His footsteps were slower than usual, heavy. I turned from the sink, wiping my hands on a towel, trying to smile like everything was normal. "You're home early," I said. He nodded, setting down his keys. "I had to stop by the jeweler downtown. They called about my cufflinks." My heart skipped a beat. "Your cufflinks?" He looked up at me then, directly, his eyes calm but unreadable. "The ones Liam got me last Christmas. One went missing a while back. They found it." I froze. My fingers tightened around the towel. It was as if the world tilted slightly. I knew what he was doing. He wasn't talking about his cufflink. He was talking about the cufflink. I forced a small, trembling laugh. "Oh, that's good." He nodded again, watching me too closely. "Yeah, it is." Then he walked past me, heading upstairs, leaving a trail of silence so sharp it hurt to breathe. That night, I couldn't eat. The sound of his voice replayed in my head, not the words, but the tone. Controlled, cold, careful. The kind of tone people use when they already know the answer but want to see if you'll lie to them anyway. I sat by Ella's door later, listening to her hum softly while doing her homework. She was growing up so fast, with her father's patience and my restlessness. I thought about how much she loved Ethan, how she always said he was her hero. The thought of breaking that image, of becoming the woman who destroyed her father's heart, made me feel sick. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow while Ethan slept beside me. His breathing was even, calm, as if he were at peace, but I knew better. He was pretending, just like me. The next morning, he left early again, but not before leaving a note on the kitchen counter. It was short, just a reminder to pick up milk on my way back from work. His handwriting was steady, but the words felt mechanical. The little hearts he used to draw next to my name were gone. That's when it hit me. Love doesn't always end with screaming or slammed doors. Sometimes it ends with silence, with small absences that pile up until you can't remember what warmth felt like. Later that week, I saw Liam for the first time since that night months ago. He came to the bookstore, pretending it was coincidence. My heart pounded when I saw him walk through the glass doors, his coat damp from the rain, his hair slightly graying at the sides. He looked tired, nervous. "Clara," he said quietly, "we need to talk." I glanced around. The store was nearly empty. I led him to the back aisle, my hands trembling. "You shouldn't be here." "I had to see you," he whispered. "Ethan called me." My stomach dropped. "What?" He asked me if I'd lost a cufflink. I felt the world tilt again. "And what did you say?" I told him I had. "But Clara," he looked at me, eyes full of guilt. "He knows." I could hear it in his voice. I pressed a hand to my mouth. "Oh God, he's not angry," Liam continued softly. "That's what scares me. He's too calm." We stood there in silence, surrounded by shelves full of forgotten stories. I wanted to scream at him for coming, for touching my life, for ruining what was left of my family. But I couldn't, because it wasn't just his fault. It was mine. I had let it happen. I had opened that door. "Don't come here again," I said finally. "Whatever happens now, we face it separately." He nodded, his eyes heavy. "I never meant to hurt you." "You did," I whispered. "You just didn't mean to get caught." When I drove home that evening, the air felt heavy again, like a storm waiting to break. Ethan was in the living room when I walked in, reading something on his phone. He didn't look up. I set down my bag and stood there for a long time, watching him, his shoulders, his stillness, the quiet fury in the way he avoided my eyes. I wanted to speak, to tell him the truth. But fear wrapped around me like a rope. I was terrified of losing him, of losing Ella, of losing the life we had built. I did what cowards do. I said nothing. For the next few days, we moved like ghosts around each other. He would leave before I woke up, return after dinner, barely speaking. When he did speak, it was short, polite, like talking to a stranger. Even Ella noticed. "Mom," she said one night while I tucked her in, "did you and Dad fight?" I froze. "Why do you ask, sweetie?" "Because he doesn't laugh anymore," she said quietly. "And you don't sing when you cook." I smiled weakly, brushing her hair. "We're just tired, baby. Grown-ups get tired sometimes." She nodded, but her eyes didn't believe me. When I went to bed that night, Ethan was sitting by the window, staring out at the dark. The light from the street lamp drew a faint line across his face, sharp, lonely. "You should sleep," I said softly. He didn't look at me. "Can't." I hesitated, stepping closer. "Something on your mind?" He finally turned his head, his eyes meeting mine, eyes that once looked at me with love, now filled with quiet pain. "Too many things," he said simply. Then he stood up, walked past me, and left the room. That was the moment I realized I was already losing him. Not because he'd stopped loving me, but because he was teaching himself how to stop. The silence became unbearable. The house that once held our laughter now held our ghosts. Even Ella began spending more time at her friend's house, sensing the tension she couldn't understand. Then one evening, Ethan came home with flowers. My heart leapt stupidly, hopefully. I thought maybe he was ready to talk, to forgive, to reach for me again. But when he handed them to me, his eyes were distant. "I thought these might brighten the room," he said. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice breaking. He nodded. "Dinner's on the stove. I'm going out for a bit." And, just like that, he left again. That night, I sat alone at the table with the flowers between us, untouched food growing cold. I kept waiting for the sound of the door, for his voice, for something. But the only sound that came was the clock ticking away the seconds of a love that was slowly dying. I didn't know it then, but Ethan wasn't just walking away to clear his mind. He was planning something. Something that would make me face every piece of pain I had caused him, and when it came, I would learn that silence isn't the worst kind of punishment. Sometimes, it's the calm before the storm. There are storms that announce themselves with thunder and lightning, wild, loud, impossible to miss. And then there are storms that come quietly. They begin with a whisper, a soft shift in the wind, the kind that doesn't scare you until it's already too late. Ethan's storm was the quiet kind. For weeks, he had been distant but composed. Not a word of anger, not a question, not even an accusation. That calm scared me more than rage ever could. Rage I could have handled, I could have cried, begged, apologized. But silence gave me nothing to hold on to. It was like standing on ice that might crack at any second, yet never did. He started making small changes. Subtle at first, then sharper. He began coming home late, later than ever before. Sometimes he'd tell me it was work, other times, he didn't bother with explanations. I tried not to ask. Maybe I was afraid of what the answer would be. On weekends, he'd take Ella out, to the park, to breakfast, to the lake, but he never asked me to come along. They used to be our family outings. Now they were father-daughter escapes. I'd watch from the window as they drove away, and I'd tell myself this was my punishment, to stand in the doorway of my own life, watching it move on without me. One evening, when they returned, I saw something new. Ethan had bought a camera. He was taking pictures of Ella, her laughter, her messy hair, her freckles shining in the sunlight. I watched them from the kitchen window, and something inside me ached. Not jealousy, not quite. It was the ache of being forgotten. Later that night, while he was showering, I looked through the camera. The pictures were beautiful, warm, golden, full of love. But there was not a single photo of me. Not one. It was as if I had been erased. That was the beginning of his revenge. Not through cruelty, but through absence. He didn't shout, didn't accuse. He simply began to live as if I no longer existed. He spoke to me only when necessary, and always in short sentences. "Dinner's ready? Ella needs new shoes. I'll be late tonight." No emotion. No warmth. Just statements of fact. At first, I tried to bridge the distance. I left small notes for him, "Have a good day," or "Drive safe." They remained untouched, left on the counter where I placed them. I tried to cook his favorite meals. He'd thank me, then eat quietly, never looking up. I began to realize that his silence wasn't just a wall. It was a mirror, reflecting my betrayal back at me. Then one morning, I noticed a second toothbrush in the bathroom, not mine. A new scent on his shirts. My stomach twisted with panic. For the first time, I tasted what he must have felt, that awful, hollow ache of suspicion. When he came home that night, I couldn't stop myself. "Ethan, is there someone else?" He looked at me for a long time. His eyes were calm, but his voice carried the chill of winter. Would it matter? The words hit me harder than any shout could have. He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. He just left the question hanging in the air, forcing me to feel the weight of my own hypocrisy. I had no right to ask. No right to hurt. After that night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house kept me awake, the creak of the floorboards, the ticking of the clock, the soft sighs of Ethan turning in his sleep. Guilt sat on my chest like a stone. A few days later, he told me he was going on a work trip. "Just 3 days," he said, packing calmly. "I'll take Ella to your mom's before I leave. She loves staying there." I nodded, helping him fold his shirts, my hands trembling. When he zipped up his bag, I finally found the courage to ask, "Ethan, are we okay?" He paused for a moment, then smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We're getting there." He kissed my forehead before leaving, a soft, mechanical gesture that felt like a goodbye disguised as kindness. For those 3 days, the house was painfully silent. I wandered from room to room, touching the furniture, the walls, anything that still carried traces of him. I ended up in his study, a place I rarely entered. The air smelled faintly of his cologne. On his desk was a stack of photographs, the ones he'd been taking lately. I picked them up, flipping through them slowly. Ella's laughter, the park, the kitchen table, the garden. And then, near the bottom, a photo that made me freeze. It was me. I was standing by the window, lost in thought, unaware of the camera. The sunlight caught my face just enough to show the sadness in my expression. Beneath it, in his neat handwriting, he'd written, "The stranger in my home." Tears blurred my vision. That one line said everything he hadn't spoken. He saw me as a stranger now. Not his wife, not his partner, just someone who lived in the shell of their old life. When he returned from his trip, I tried to act normal, but inside, I was unraveling. I wanted to beg him to talk to me, to scream, to hate me, anything but this quiet destruction. But he didn't give me that chance. Instead, he began rebuilding his world without me. He started spending more time outside the house, volunteering at the community center, helping with local charity events, meeting people I'd never heard of. When he spoke of them, his eyes lit up in a way they hadn't in months. He had found something that made him feel alive again, something that wasn't me. The real revenge, I realized, wasn't about hurting me. It was about showing me how unnecessary I had become. One Sunday afternoon, I walked into the living room and saw him laughing with Grace, his mother, and Ella. They were playing a board game, joy filling the room like sunlight. For a moment, I stood there, smiling. Then I noticed it, the way their laughter dimmed when they saw me. The conversation stumbled. Grace's expression softened, but Ethan's didn't change. He simply looked at me, polite, distant, then turned back to the game. That's when I finally broke. That night, after Ella went to bed, I found him in the study again, reading. My voice trembled as I spoke. "Ethan, please, just talk to me. Whatever you're doing, whatever this is, I can't take it anymore." He looked up, calm as ever. "What is it you can't take, Clara? The silence? The distance? Or the reflection of what you've done?" I took a step closer, tears running down my face. "I made a mistake. I know that. But you can't just erase me like this." He sighed softly, closing the book. "You didn't make a mistake, Clara. You made a choice. And now I'm making mine." "What choice?" I whispered. "The choice to stop living in a lie." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Every word cut cleanly, calmly, like a blade through glass. He stood and walked past me, heading for the door. But before he left, he turned back. "You know what the worst part of betrayal is?" he said quietly. "It's not the act itself. It's the moment you realize the person you loved most is capable of it. That's the part that doesn't heal." And then he was gone. I stood there, staring at the empty doorway, my chest aching. For the first time, I understood that his silence wasn't just punishment, it was grief. He wasn't trying to destroy me. He was mourning me. Mourning the version of me he used to love. Over the next few weeks, the storm he had planned unfolded with quiet precision. He began separating his life from mine in every visible way: new bank account, new schedule, new circle of friends. He didn't file for divorce, not yet. It was as if he wanted me to live in the limbo between guilt and loss, to feel the weight of every second slipping through my fingers, and it worked. Every day felt like a slow death, But even in that storm, there was something strange, a hint of mercy in the way he never exposed me. He never told Grace. Never told Ella. Never told anyone. He carried my secret like a burden he didn't want but refused to drop. That mercy broke me more than any revenge could have. One evening, as he was leaving for another late meeting, he paused by the door and looked at me. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was softer than before. "Clara," he said quietly, "I don't hate you. I just don't know who you are anymore." And with that, he left, leaving me alone with the truth that haunted me most. He was right. I didn't know who I was anymore either. There's a sound a house makes when it stops being a home. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's the sound of silence settling into corners, of laughter that doesn't echo anymore. It's the sound of memories turning into ghosts. That's what our house had become a museum of before. Before the lies, before the distance, before I became the stranger Ethan saw when he looked at me. Everywhere I went, I could still feel him, not through presence, but through absence. His coffee mug left on the counter, his shoes neatly by the door, his cologne fading from the hallway. Little traces of the life we used to share, mocking me. I'd catch myself doing small, foolish things, fixing his pillow before bed, setting out 2 cups of coffee in the morning, waiting for footsteps that never came. Every day, I found a new way to break my own heart. Ella, our daughter, had started to notice the changes. "Children always do, Mommy," she asked one night while brushing her hair. "Why doesn't Daddy smile at you anymore?" I froze. My throat closed. I wanted to tell her that grown-ups sometimes lose their way. That sometimes, even love can get sick and tired and heavy. But I couldn't say that to her. I just smiled weakly and said, "He's tired, sweetheart. That's all." But even as I said it, I knew I was lying again, this time to an innocent child. After Ethan's storm began, I tried everything to fix what I had broken. I cooked his favorite meals. I left him letters instead of notes, pages full of apologies, full of words I should have said before. I begged for one conversation, but each time, he responded with the same haunting calm, silence. And yet, every time he passed by, every glance he gave me, even the empty ones, reminded me that he still saw me. That somewhere beneath all the wreckage, I still mattered enough to be disappointed in. That tiny, painful hope kept me alive. Then came the night that broke me completely. It was raining, a steady, endless downpour. I was sitting by the window, staring at the streetlights blurred by raindrops. Ethan came home late, his hair wet, jacket dripping. He looked tired, but not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. He walked straight past me toward Ella's room, kissed her goodnight, and turned to leave again. Something inside me snapped. "Ethan, please," I said, standing up. My voice cracked under the weight of weeks of silence. "Just talk to me. Scream at me. Hate me. But don't ignore me like this." He stopped, but didn't turn. I stepped closer, tears spilling freely. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I can't live like I'm invisible in my own home. Please." He turned slowly, and when his eyes met mine, I saw it. Not anger, not hatred, but emptiness. "Clara," he said quietly, "do you even know what you're asking for?" "I'm asking for a chance," I whispered. He shook his head. "A chance to what? To fix what can't be fixed? To pretend nothing happened?" His voice trembled slightly now, the first crack in his calm. "You made a choice, Clara. You chose a moment that destroyed years." The room went still. Only the rain spoke. "I know," I whispered. "And I'd give anything to undo it." He looked at me for a long moment, eyes heavy with something between pity and sorrow. "You can't undo it," he said. "You can only live with it." Then he walked away. That night, I broke down in our bedroom, the same room that had once been full of warmth and whispers. I screamed into the pillow, cried until I couldn't breathe. I wanted the pain to stop, but I also knew I deserved every ounce of it. After that night, something inside me changed. I stopped chasing him, stopped leaving notes, stopped waiting for him to talk. Instead, I turned inward, toward the mess I had become. I started writing again. Not letters to him, but diary entries, small confessions of the heart. I wrote about how guilt felt like a second skin, how silence had a taste, how love could turn into punishment when you hurt the person who gave it freely. One evening, I found myself standing in front of the mirror. really looking at myself for the first time in months. The reflection staring back wasn't the woman I remembered. My eyes were dull, my smile forced, my face thinner. I whispered to my reflection, "Who are you?" The mirror didn't answer, but I knew. I was the stranger in my own home, the ghost haunting Ethan's grief. Weeks passed. Seasons shifted, and then one morning, something unexpected happened. Ethan asked me to have breakfast with him. It was a simple thing, just toast and coffee at the same table. But after months of distance, it felt like a miracle. We sat in silence for a while. Then, without looking up, he said, "I'm thinking about selling the house." My fork froze midair. "What?" "It's too heavy here," he said quietly. "Too many memories that don't breathe anymore." I wanted to beg him not to say we could make new memories. But I knew that would be selfish. This house wasn't his home anymore. It was his cage. So I nodded, pretending to be composed. "If that's what you need." He looked at me then, really looked, maybe for the first time in months. There was a softness in his eyes I hadn't seen in so long. "Clara, I don't hate you," he said. "I just don't trust you." The honesty hurt more than anger ever could, but it was real. For the first time, his words didn't feel like punishment, they felt like truth. That night, I sat alone in the dark, whispering to the walls that had once held our laughter. "He doesn't hate me," I said aloud, as if saying it would make it true. "He just doesn't trust me." Somehow, that small mercy became my lifeline. Over the following weeks, I tried to be better, not to win him back, but to become someone worth forgiving. I volunteered at Ella's school, started therapy, even joined a local writing group. I stopped asking him for love. I started trying to earn respect. It wasn't easy. There were days when he wouldn't speak at all, when I'd hear him laugh on the phone with someone else and my chest would burn with jealousy and regret. But I stayed silent, letting time do what words couldn't, and slowly, painfully slowly, the air between us began to shift. One evening, while I was cleaning the garden, Ethan walked over. "You've been taking care of this again," he said, nodding at the roses I had revived. I smiled faintly. "Trying to." He crouched beside me, touched a petal gently. "They look alive." "So do you," I wanted to say, but I didn't. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw something, a flicker of warmth in his eyes. But just as quickly, it was gone. He stood, wiped his hands, and said, "Dinner's on me tonight." It was nothing, just takeout pizza and awkward small talk, but for the first time in months, we laughed together. Just once. It felt fragile, like glass, but it was something. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something important. Forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a process, one that starts long before the other person gives it. Maybe Ethan would never love me the way he once did, maybe he'd never trust me fully again, but maybe that wasn't the point anymore. Maybe the real lesson was learning to face the version of myself I had buried, the one who had made the wrong choice, and who now had to live with the consequences. Because for the first time since it all began, I stopped trying to be who I was before and started trying to become someone new, someone honest, someone kind, someone who could forgive herself. Even if he never did. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I whispered to the darkness, to him, to myself, to the silence, "I'll never stop being sorry, but I'll stop being lost." And somewhere in that quiet, I thought I heard the faintest sound, Ethan's voice, soft from the next room. "Good night, Clara." It was small, barely there, but it was the first warmth I'd felt in forever. There's a point in grief where the pain dulls enough to let the light through. It doesn't mean the wound has healed, it just means you can see again. That was where I found myself, standing halfway between what we used to be and what I hoped we could become. Weeks after the dinner that had felt almost normal, Ethan and I began living like polite strangers, sharing a quiet rhythm. We didn't fight anymore. We didn't talk much either. But there was a calm between us, and in that calm I started noticing the small echoes of the life we'd built. Every Sunday, he still brewed coffee exactly the way I liked it, 2 sugars, 1 cream, even though he never asked if I wanted any. I still ironed his shirts on Friday nights. We both pretended these were habits, but deep down they were tiny, stubborn acts of love neither of us could let go. One afternoon, Ella came home with a school project, family through the years. She needed old photos. We sat on the living room floor surrounded by dusty albums, the air thick with memories. "Look, Daddy's hair," she giggled, holding up a picture from our honeymoon. Ethan laughed, really laughed, and for a moment, the sound filled the room like sunlight. I felt my throat tighten. I watched him trace a finger over the picture of us standing by the sea, wind in our hair, laughter frozen in time. He didn't look at me, but the silence between us softened. Later that night, when Ella went to bed, I lingered in the hallway. "Thank you," I whispered. "For what?" he asked without turning. "For laughing again." He said nothing, but his shoulders eased, and that was enough. The next weeks passed quietly. We began having breakfast together again, not every day, but often enough that it started to feel normal. Sometimes we spoke about Ella, sometimes about work, sometimes about nothing at all. The silence had changed. It no longer punished. It simply was. One evening, a summer storm rolled in. The power flickered, the house bathed in candlelight. We sat at the kitchen table, listening to the rain drum on the windows. "It's peaceful," I said softly. Ethan nodded. "It used to be our favorite kind of night." The memories came rushing back, us wrapped in a blanket on the porch, talking about dreams we hadn't even realized we'd already outgrown. I smiled faintly. "I remember." He looked at me then, eyes tired but kind. "You know, I didn't stop loving you the moment I found out," he said. "It just hurt too much to keep showing it." My heart clenched. "And now?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe love changes shape after it breaks." We sat in silence, the candles flickering. I wanted to reach out, but I didn't. Instead, I whispered, "Maybe broken things still make music." He smiled, barely. "Maybe." For the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like an ending, it felt like the first fragile note of something new. Summer melted into autumn. The house was up for sale now. Ethan hadn't changed his mind. But the process was slow, giving us time to adjust. We began spending evenings sorting through boxes, old books, letters, tiny relics of our shared years. I found a box of our early love letters, yellowed with age. My handwriting was round and hopeful. His was steady, confident. I read one aloud before I could stop myself. "Promise me we'll never let silence win." The words hung between us like a challenge we had both failed. Ethan met my eyes and said quietly, "We were young." "But not wrong," I said. He didn't answer. But that night, when I went to bed, the letter was folded neatly on my pillow. Then, just as life seemed to find its balance again, the echo turned into a jolt. One morning, Ethan collapsed in the driveway. A heart flutter, minor, the doctor said, but serious enough to scare us. I spent the night in the hospital chair beside his bed, watching machines blink in rhythm with his breath. Guilt flooded me all over again, sharper than ever. All the times I had wished he'd look at me, now I just wanted him to open his eyes. When he did, weak but smiling faintly, he whispered, "You're still here." I gripped his hand. "I never left, Ethan." "Not really." He squeezed my fingers, fragile and trembling. "Maybe I just stopped seeing you." In that sterile hospital light, everything false between us fell away. We were just two people who had loved, hurt, and somehow found our way back to the same moment. The next few weeks were quiet recovery. I drove him to appointments, cooked his meals, reminded him to take his medicine. He didn't say much, but I caught him watching me sometimes, his eyes softer, searching. One evening, he said, "You know, when I was lying there, I kept thinking about how we used to dance in the kitchen." I smiled through tears. "You hated dancing." "I hated being bad at it," he said, chuckling. "But I loved that you made me try." He stood slowly, offered his hand. "Dance with me, Clara." There, in our dimly lit living room, among boxes and candlelight, we swayed to the rhythm of our own breathing. No music, no perfection, just two people who remembered how it used to feel. I rested my head on his chest, hearing the faint, uneven beat of his heart. It sounded fragile, but alive. "Thank you for staying," he whispered. "Thank you for letting me," I said. Tears blurred everything, but for once they didn't hurt. After that night, something in our home changed again, not back to what it was, but into something gentler. We spoke openly about the past, about my mistake, about his silence. Sometimes it ended in tears, sometimes in laughter. It was messy, but it was real. We never called it forgiveness. We didn't need to. It was something quieter, and understanding that love, when broken, doesn't disappear, it transforms. The house finally sold a month later. As we packed the last box, I found the cufflink, the same one that had started everything. I held it for a long time, then handed it to Ethan. "You should throw it away," I said. He looked at it, then at me. "No," he said softly. "We'll keep it. As a reminder." I didn't ask of what. I already knew. On our last night in that house, we stood together in the empty living room. Moonlight spilled across the floor. "This place saw everything," I murmured. Ethan nodded. "It's time to let it rest." I reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. We walked out together, closing the door behind us. As we stepped into the night, I realized the echoes of what we weren't haunting anymore. They were guiding, showing us that even broken hearts can find their rhythm again if they're brave enough to keep listening. And for the first time in years, the silence between us didn't hurt. It simply breathed. The day we moved out, the sky was soft with gray clouds, neither raining nor sunny, just waiting like us. The moving truck hummed quietly in the driveway while Ethan and I stood side by side, looking at the house that had witnessed everything: our laughter, our silence, our breaking, and our fragile attempts to heal. The windows looked like tired eyes. The porch creaked one last goodbye. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. My tears had already lived here. All I felt was a strange stillness, as if my heart had finally stopped running. Ethan slid his hands into his jacket pockets. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, though part of me never would be. As we drove away, I watched the house shrink in the rearview mirror until it was just a blur, then nothing. That's how it goes with places that once held your soul. They never really leave you. They just become quieter ghosts. Our new home was smaller, humbler, tucked at the edge of town near the woods. It smelled of pine and dust, of beginnings that didn't ask for promises. The walls were bare, the floors still cold, but there was peace in the emptiness. Ethan chose the house himself. "It feels honest," he'd said when he showed it to me. And he was right. It wasn't pretty, but it was real, just like us. The first few weeks were clumsy. We bumped into boxes, argued over shelves, and disagreed on where the couch should go. But somehow, even those small, silly arguments felt alive again. For the first time in years, our silence wasn't heavy, it was just comfortable. Ella adapted faster than both of us. She filled the house with her laughter, her music, her teenage chaos. Watching her grow was like watching time rebuild what guilt had broken. Sometimes I'd find her sitting next to Ethan, showing him songs she liked. Other times, I'd hear her humming in her room. It made the house feel like home before we even realized it was. One evening, while unpacking old boxes, I found the tin of letters again, the ones from our early years. I sat on the floor, reading them under the warm glow of a lamp. I didn't notice Ethan standing in the doorway until he spoke. "Do they still hurt to read?" I looked up. "No. They just remind me who we were before we forgot how to listen." He came closer, sat beside me. The air between us was quiet, steady. "Maybe that's what forgiveness really is," he said softly. "Remembering the good without denying the bad." I smiled faintly. That sounds like something Grace would have said. At the mention of his mother, Ethan's face softened. "She would have loved this house," he said. "She used to tell me that healing doesn't happen in the same place where pain was born." "She was right," I whispered. He nodded, and for a long while, we just sat there, two people surrounded by memories, finally unafraid to face them. Autumn came early that year. The air turned crisp, and the woods outside our window burned gold and amber. Every morning, I'd make coffee and watch the light spill across the leaves. Ethan often joined me, quiet and thoughtful. Sometimes he'd reach for my hand. Not every day, but enough that I stopped counting the ones he didn't. We didn't talk about us much anymore. The words weren't needed. We were learning a new language, one of patience, small gestures, and shared silence. He'd fix the porch light without me asking. I'd leave his favorite tea by the bed. These were the ways we said I remember. One morning, I woke up before him and found him asleep on the couch, a book resting on his chest. The early light caught the silver strands in his hair, and for the first time, I saw how much time had passed. He looked peaceful, older, softer. And I realized something. Love doesn't always stay beautiful, but if you're lucky, it becomes true. As months passed, life began to weave itself quietly around us again. Ella turned 17, busy with school and friends, her laughter still our favorite sound. We celebrated her birthday with a small gathering, nothing grand, just family and warmth. Ethan grilled in the backyard, and I watched him from the window, apron dusted with flour, heartful in ways words couldn't explain. At one point, he looked up and caught me staring. He smiled, not the forced kind, but a real, gentle smile that reached his eyes. It was small, but it felt like the world shifting back into color. That night, after the guests left and Ella was asleep, we sat outside under the quiet hum of crickets. "You've changed," he said suddenly. "So have you," I replied. He shook his head. "No, Clara. I mean, you're lighter now. I don't see guilt when I look at you anymore." I swallowed hard. "That's because you stopped reminding me." He was silent for a moment, then said, "Maybe I finally realized punishing you was punishing myself too." His words broke something gentle inside me. I reached out, hesitated, then placed my hand over his. "Ethan," I whispered, "thank you for not giving up on me, even when you wanted to." He didn't answer right away, but his thumb brushed against my fingers. It was the closest thing to forgiveness I'd ever felt. Winter arrived quietly, laying soft white blankets over the world outside our window. The nights grew longer, but not lonelier. We had found a rhythm again, slow, imperfect, but ours. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night and see Ethan watching the snowfall, lost in thought. "Can't sleep?" I'd ask. He'd smile faintly. "Just thinking about how far we've come." And we had. From betrayal to silence, from silence to healing, from healing to something that resembled peace. But peace is fragile. It needs care, attention, truth. I had learned that the hard way. Every day was a choice, to stay honest, to stay kind, to never take the small things for granted. Sometimes, when he brushed past me in the kitchen or called my name softly, I'd feel the echo of the woman I once was, the one who took love as something permanent. Now, I knew better. Love wasn't a promise, it was a practice. On Christmas Eve, snow fell softly as we decorated the tree together. Ella hung the last ornament, a small glass heart that had survived from our first Christmas as newlyweds. "You should put it up," she said, handing it to Ethan and me. Our hands met around the fragile heart. It caught the light, glimmering red and gold. We hung it near the top, right beneath the star. Ethan stepped back, smiled. "Looks perfect." I looked at him, at the home around us, at the warmth that had taken years to rebuild. "It does," I said softly. "It really does." Later that night, as the world outside slept, I sat by the window again. Snowflakes drifted like tiny blessings against the glass. Behind me, Ethan's quiet breathing filled the room, and I realized something I never had before. The past doesn't disappear. It just becomes part of the foundation you build upon. The house we left behind still existed in memory, in lessons, in the scars that shaped who we'd become. But this house, this quiet life, this version of us, it was proof that, even after the worst kind of breaking, love could still find its way home. It's strange how love can grow quietly, like ivy crawling over old stone. You don't notice it at first, then one day you look up, and everything that was once broken is covered in green again. That's how life began to feel with Ethan. Not perfect, not effortless, but soft, alive. It had been almost 2 years since we moved into the new house. Time had dulled the sharp edges of pain. We still carried our scars, but they no longer bled when touched. Sometimes, on quiet mornings, I'd catch myself humming while making coffee, and realize it had been days since I'd thought about the past. That, I think, is what healing really means, not forgetting, but no longer needing to remember. Ethan had taken up gardening that spring. It started with a few tomato plants in the backyard, then grew into a small garden filled with flowers, herbs, and a stubborn rosebush that refused to bloom. Every morning, he'd be outside in his worn flannel shirt, talking softly to his plants like they were old friends. I'd watch him from the kitchen window, smiling to myself. There was something about that sight, the same man who once built walls between us now patiently tending to life again, that made my chest ache in the gentlest way. One afternoon, as he wiped sweat from his forehead, he called out, "Clara, come look." I stepped outside, curious. In his palm lay a single rosebud, fragile but alive. "She finally decided to trust me," he said, grinning like a boy. I laughed. "Maybe she just got tired of your talking." He chuckled, shaking his head. "No, I think she just needed time. Like someone else I know." I rolled my eyes, but my heart warmed. That was Ethan's way of saying he saw me still after everything. And that mattered more than I could admit. Later that summer, Ella got accepted to a university out of state. The day she told us, she was glowing with excitement, her eyes bright with dreams. Ethan and I exchanged a quiet glance. Pride mixed with fear. Our baby was leaving. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table, she said, "I know you'll miss me, but I think this is good for all of us." New beginnings, right? I smiled, though my chest tightened. "Of course, sweetheart. That's what life is about." But after she went to bed, Ethan found me sitting in the living room, staring at her baby photos. "She'll be fine," he said gently, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I know," I whispered. "It's just, she was the reason I kept fighting, even when we were falling apart." "What if the silence comes back after she's gone?" He hesitated before answering. "Then we'll have to learn to fill it ourselves." That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of crickets outside. I turned to Ethan. "Do you ever think about what we'd be if none of it happened?" He opened his eyes slowly. "All the time," he admitted. "But then I think, maybe we'd have stayed comfortable instead of honest." His answer surprised me. "Honest?" He nodded. "You and I were living next to each other, not with each other. I didn't see you anymore. You didn't see me. It took breaking to make us real again." I stared at the ceiling, tears pricking my eyes. "You think it was worth it?" He didn't reply right away. Then, softly, "I think you were worth fighting for." Even when I forgot how. That was the first night in a long time that I fell asleep holding his hand. When fall arrived, the house grew quieter. Ella left for college, and suddenly every room echoed a little too much. I busied myself with small things, painting, reading, rearranging furniture, but the silence crept in like a slow fog. Ethan noticed. One evening, he came home with 2 plane tickets. "Boston," he said. "Weekend trip. Just us." I blinked, surprised. "You hate traveling." He smiled. "I hate being still more." That trip was the first time we had traveled together since, before everything. We walked along the harbor, ate seafood at a small local diner, and even got lost once on a winding street. I laughed until my sides hurt, and Ethan just watched me, as if memorizing the sound. On our last night there, we sat by the water, wrapped in the soft chill of early October. The city lights shimmered against the waves. "Do you ever regret staying?" he asked suddenly. I looked at him. "Do you?" He exhaled. "Sometimes I regret who I became. But never staying. Staying was the hardest thing I've ever done. And the right one." We fell quiet after that. The kind of silence that feels sacred, not empty. It was then I realized that love didn't need grand promises anymore. It lived in small, steady moments like this. When we returned home, life settled into a new rhythm. I started writing again, just small reflections, pieces of thought. Ethan encouraged it, said my words had always been stronger than I gave them credit for. One morning, while cleaning, I found the old cufflink, the one that had started it all. It was at the bottom of a jewelry box, dull now, almost forgotten. I held it in my palm for a long moment, then walked to the garden. Ethan was kneeling by the rosebush, pruning gently. I didn't say anything, just knelt beside him and buried the cufflink in the soil. He watched quietly, understanding without words. When it was done, he took my hand, dirt and all, and pressed a kiss to my knuckles. Some memories deserve a grave, not a frame. Months passed, and life became beautifully ordinary again. Sunday breakfasts, walks through the woods, the occasional movie night that ended with both of us falling asleep halfway through. But one evening, as we sat watching the sunset, Ethan grew quiet. "Too quiet, what's wrong?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "I went to the doctor today." My heart stopped for a moment. And? He looked away. They found something. Probably nothing serious. Just tests next week. The world seemed to still. My breath caught in my throat. Ethan, he gave me a small, tired smile. Don't panic yet. I'm fine. But I wasn't fine. The fear came rushing back, the fear of losing what I'd finally rebuilt. The thought of facing the world without him felt unbearable. That night, while he slept, I sat beside him, tracing the lines of his hand. I realized then that life always takes what we think we can't live without, but sometimes, just sometimes, it gives us the chance to love better before it does. The test results came back a week later. It wasn't life-threatening, just something he'd have to manage carefully. Relief washed through me like a wave, leaving tears I didn't know I'd been holding. He caught me crying and laughed softly. You thought you were rid of me that easily? I hit him lightly on the arm. Don't joke about that. He pulled me close, kissed my forehead. Then promise me something, he said. What? When the time really does come, don't let your love become regret. Let it become grace. I didn't answer. I couldn't. But inside, I made that promise, quietly, completely, and maybe that's what love becomes after years of breaking and rebuilding. Not a story of passion or revenge or perfection, but of small, silent promises that keep two souls walking side by side, even when the road isn't smooth. That winter, the rosebush bloomed again. One morning, I found Ethan standing by it, smiling softly. You know, he said, brushing snow off a petal, I think she forgave us too. I wrapped my arms around him, resting my head on his shoulder. No, I whispered. She just never stopped believing we'd try again. He turned to me then, eyes filled with that same steady love I had once thought lost forever. Neither did I, he said. The wind blew softly, carrying the scent of earth and snow and something like peace. And for the first time in years, I felt whole, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was finally real. Time moves differently when love grows older. It no longer rushes, it lingers. It pauses to hold your hand a little longer, to memorize the sound of a shared laugh, to make ordinary mornings feel like soft gifts. Years had passed since the night Ethan got his test results. He was healthy mostly. The doctors told us to slow down, to cherish calm routines, and we did. Our lives became gentler, slower. Every season, every sunrise, felt borrowed yet beautiful. We had grown old together quietly, the kind of old where comfort replaces urgency, where silence isn't empty, it's familiar, but underneath all that peace, there was still a quiet ache. A knowing that someday, one of us would wake up to a morning too still, too quiet. I tried not to think about it, until the day I had to. It was a Thursday. Cold, still, with pale light seeping through the curtains. Ethan had been tired lately, his steps slower, his laughter softer. We blamed it on age, on winter. He hated fuss, so I didn't push him to see the doctor again. That morning, I went to make coffee like always. 2 cups. Always 2. But when I came back to our room, he was still so still. For a moment, I thought he was just sleeping. Then I saw the way his hand had slipped from the blanket. The way his chest didn't rise, the world tilted. The mug slipped from my hand and shattered. Ethan, I whispered, my voice trembling. Ethan, wake up. But he didn't. The days that followed blurred into each other. Family came. Friends visited. There were flowers everywhere, too many flowers. I couldn't stand the scent of them. Ella flew home from New York, strong for me in the way daughters are when they don't know how to grieve yet. I remember her holding my hand as we stood at his grave, the wind cold against our faces. I thought I had no tears left. But when the first handful of earth hit his coffin, my knees gave out. Because no matter how prepared you think you are, nothing readies you for the silence that follows a heartbeat that once filled your world. For weeks, I couldn't touch his things. His coat still hung by the door, his shoes lined neatly near the porch. His favorite mug sat by the sink. I couldn't move them. It felt like erasing him piece by piece, but grief has its own rhythm. One morning, I woke up and realized I needed to open the windows again. Let the air move. Let the house breathe. So I started cleaning, Not to forget him, but to find him again in the small things. That's when I found it. A small, cream-colored envelope tucked inside his desk drawer. My name written on it in his careful handwriting, for Clara. My hands shook as I opened it. The paper inside was folded neatly, edges yellowing with time. He had written it years ago, before we even moved here. Maybe during the years when silence was still our only language. The words blurred as I began to read. My Clara, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to say everything I should have while I could. I'll say it here, on paper. Because you always understood written words better than spoken ones. There were nights I looked at you and wondered where you'd gone. You were right there, breathing beside me, but I couldn't reach you. Maybe because I had already built too many walls between us. Maybe because you had already learned to live behind them. I was angry for a long time. Angry at you, at myself, at the life we built and then lost sight of. But I never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second. When you hurt me, I thought revenge would make me feel powerful. It didn't. It just made me smaller. Forgiving you didn't make the pain disappear. It made space for peace, and that peace became love again. A quieter, older kind of love. The kind that holds your hand even when it's shaking. If there's one thing I want you to remember, it's this. We were flawed, but we were, and being yours, even in the hardest years, was still the best thing that ever happened to me. I buried the cufflink not because I wanted to forget, but because I wanted to plant something in its place. Every time that rose blooms, it's you. It's us. Proof that something beautiful can grow where something painful once lived. So promise me, if I'm gone before you, don't let grief take more than it should. Don't stop living the life we built from our broken pieces. Don't stop laughing or writing or watching the rain the way you love to. And please, please, don't stop forgiving me for the days I couldn't love you the way you deserved, because I never stopped trying. Yours, always, E.By the time I finished reading, my tears had soaked the paper. His words wrapped around me like a whisper from somewhere between here and forever. For the first time since his death, I didn't feel alone. He had been saying goodbye long before he left, just in his quiet, careful way. Weeks passed. The house began to feel like home again, even with its empty spaces. I kept the letter on my nightstand, reading it whenever the nights grew too long. One afternoon, I went out to the garden. The rosebush was still there, fragile under the chill of early spring. I knelt beside it, brushed my fingers over the thorns, and smiled through tears. Your rose missed you, I whispered. Just then, the wind stirred. A single petal loosened and drifted down, landing softly on my palm. I looked up, half laughing, half crying. All right, I said. I'll keep living. I promise. In the months that followed, I began to write again, really write. Stories about love, forgiveness, and time. I wrote about the spaces between people and how sometimes those spaces hold the truest kind of love. I published one of them in a local magazine under a pen name. It was called The Cufflink and the Rose. When readers wrote back saying it made them cry, I smiled. Because that meant Ethan's love was still reaching someone, somewhere. Ella visited often. She'd bring her little daughter, our granddaughter, who had Ethan's eyes and my smile. Watching her play in the garden felt like watching time make peace with itself. One day, she ran to me, holding a small pink rose in her tiny hand. Grandma, she said, this flower came from Grandpa's tree. I laughed softly. It did, sweetheart. It's special, isn't it? She nodded seriously. Then we have to take care of it forever. And in that moment, I realized we had taken care of it, even when we didn't know how. Sometimes, at night, I still talk to him. Not out loud, but in the quiet of my heart. I tell him about Ella, about the garden, about how the rosebush blooms stronger every year, and I tell him I kept his promise, that I didn't let grief take more than it should, that I'm still here, still breathing, still living, because he was right. We were flawed, but we were, and that, in the end, was enough. It's strange how life goes on. You think it can't, that the world should stop spinning when the person you love most takes their last breath. But it doesn't. The clock still ticks, the seasons still turn, and morning still comes. Slowly, painfully, beautifully, you learn to live again. The first year without Ethan felt like walking through fog. Every sound was muffled, every day too long and too quiet. The house that once echoed with our laughter had turned into a museum of memories, every object whispering his name, his books, his glasses, his favorite pen, still resting beside the letter he'd left me. At first, I couldn't touch anything. I was terrified of losing him completely, but grief is strange, it shifts and softens with time. You don't move on, you move with it. One day you wake up and realize you can look at his picture and smile instead of cry. That day came for me on a Sunday morning, nearly a year after he was gone. I was making tea when sunlight fell across the table, hitting the rose in a small vase, one perfect bloom from the garden. It glowed red and gold, and for just a second, I felt him there, not in the way I used to, not beside me, but within me. I started teaching again, creative writing classes at the community center. It was something Ethan had always wanted me to do. The first day, I was terrified. I thought I'd forgotten how to speak to people, how to be someone other than the woman who lost her husband. But when I stood before that room of faces, all ages, all carrying their own invisible stories, something in me lit up again. I began to talk about storytelling, about emotion, about how pain can become art if you let it breathe, and as I spoke, I realized I wasn't just teaching them. I was healing myself. Every story I heard about love, betrayal, forgiveness, echoed pieces of my own, and maybe that's what connects us all in the end. The quiet courage to keep loving after loss. Ella called every week. She had her own life now, a husband, a daughter, a small home filled with the same kind of laughter that once filled ours. Her little girl, Lily, was the light of my days. She'd visit on weekends, her curls bouncing as she ran through the garden. "Grandma," she'd say, holding a rose from the bush Ethan planted, "this is Grandpa's flower, right?" "Yes, sweetheart," I'd answer, smiling through the ache. "Grandpa planted it just for us." She'd grin, her eyes bright. "Then I'm going to plant one too, next to his." And she did. A tiny sprout beside the old rose bush, reaching for the same sunlight. Watching it grow felt like watching love start over, small, fragile, but full of promise. As the years passed, I learned the art of being alone without being lonely. I started writing more seriously, small essays, then stories, then a book. It wasn't meant to be published, it was just for me. But Ella found the manuscript one day, read it, and cried. "Mom," she said, "you have to share this. People need this kind of love story, the real kind." So she helped me publish it. I titled it The House We Left Behind. It was about us, not the perfect version of love, but the true one. The kind that breaks, bleeds, and still finds a way to bloom. Readers wrote letters, messages, emails. Women my age, widows, mothers, dreamers, told me they saw themselves in Clara. That they found hope again through her story. I didn't tell them that I was Clara, that every word was a piece of my heart, stitched back together by time and memory. By the time I turned 68, my days had settled into a soft rhythm. Mornings with tea and the newspaper. Afternoons spent in the garden. Evenings with Lily, when she'd call to tell me about school or a new story she was writing. I often found myself sitting on the porch at dusk, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun slip below the trees. That's when I'd talk to Ethan softly, like he was just beside me. I kept my promise, I'd tell him. I didn't let grief take more than it should. Sometimes the wind would rustle the rosebush just then, and I'd smile. That was our language now, silence and wind and blooming petals. One afternoon, I received a letter from the publisher. They wanted to turn The House We Left Behind into an audiobook, read by someone else. I almost said yes until I heard Ethan's voice in my head, teasing, "No one can tell your story like you can, Clara." So I recorded it myself. It took days, and there were moments I had to stop because the memories caught in my throat. But when I finished, I listened to the playback, and it felt right, like I'd finally spoken our story aloud, not for the world, but for him. The final line of the book, my favorite line, was one I whispered through tears. "Sometimes love doesn't end. It just changes homes." Years turned gently into decades. My hair silvered, my steps slowed, but my heart stayed light. Grief had become a soft companion, not a shadow. Every anniversary, I visited his grave with a single rose, never more, never less. I'd stand there quietly, breathing the scent of the earth, and say, "We made it, Ethan. We really did." One year, I found someone had left a small note tucked under the rose. I in handwriting that wasn't mine. It read, "Because of your story, I forgave someone I thought I never could." I pressed it to my chest and cried, not out of sadness, but gratitude. Ethan's love was still changing lives. Even now, when I turned 75, Ella and Lily surprised me with a visit. We spent the day baking, laughing, telling stories. That evening, as the sun set, Lily sat beside me and asked, "Grandma, were you ever scared of being alone?" I thought for a moment, then said, "Yes." But then I learned that the people we love never really leave us. They just live inside us in new ways. She smiled, her young face glowing in the amber light. "So Grandpa's still here?" I nodded. "Every time you laugh. Every time a rose blooms. Every time I feel peace instead of pain, that's him." She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I think he'd be really proud of you." And I believed her. That night, as I lay in bed, the moonlight fell across the window, the same silver light that once touched our old home, our old life. I thought of Ethan, of our love, of everything that had broken and healed and bloomed again. I realized something then. Forgiveness had saved us, not just from anger, but from the kind of emptiness that love leaves behind when it dies unspoken. We had learned to forgive, to stay, to love quietly, and that, in the end, was our story, not a tragedy, but a testament. The next morning, I walked to the garden with Lily. The two rose bushes, Ethan's and hers, stood side by side, full of blossoms. She bent down and touched a petal. "Grandma," she said softly, "they look like they're holding hands." Tears filled my eyes. "Maybe they are," I whispered. The wind stirred gently, and a shower of petals danced between us. I closed my eyes and felt the world glow warm for a moment, as if love itself had leaned close to say, "I never left." I've written hundreds of letters in my life, grocery lists folded into Ethan's lunch bag, birthday cards for Ella, little notes that said, "I'll be home early, don't forget to water the plants." But the letter lying before me now is different. It's not meant to be sent. It's the confession of a woman who has spent years learning that forgiveness isn't something you're given, it's something you must learn to give yourself. The morning light filters softly through the kitchen window. The house feels smaller now, quieter, as though it has finally exhaled after holding its breath for years. The walls no longer echo with the sharp edges of our arguments or the silence that followed them. Only the hum of the refrigerator, the distant laughter of birds, and the occasional ring of Ella's voice calling from the porch break the calm. Ethan sits outside, his coffee steaming beside him, watching the road curve away into the hills. His hair is streaked with silver now, his shoulders are still broad, but they carry a gentleness they didn't before. Time has softened us both. It has worn down the jagged corners and left behind something raw and simple, like the shore after a storm. I pick up the pen again. The words come slowly at first, then begin to flow. "Ethan, if I could gather every tear I've caused you and turn it into something beautiful, I would plant it in our garden. Maybe then the pain we lived through would bloom into something that could make you smile." I pause, close my eyes, and remember the day I found the cufflink. It feels like a lifetime ago, a different version of me, someone hungry for attention, someone who mistook passion for love. That woman is gone now, buried under years of learning what love truly means, to stay, to forgive, to grow through the ache instead of running from it. Ella's laughter drifts in again, and I smile despite the tears. She's older now, in college, and she visits every weekend. She still calls Ethan Dad with the same warmth she always did, and sometimes, when she hugs me, I feel the child I almost lost to my own mistakes. She's the thread that held us together when everything else was falling apart. The letter continues. "You taught me something I didn't know love could teach. Silence can heal, distance can guide, and sometimes the greatest strength is in choosing peace over punishment. I've spent years trying to prove to myself that I deserve your forgiveness, but I've learned that forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about understanding that we're all fragile, that we all bleed where no one can see." I set the pen down. The ink has smudged beneath a tear I didn't feel fall. I think of the woman I used to be standing in this same kitchen, staring at her reflection in the glass, wondering if she'd ever be happy again. I wish I could reach back through time and tell her that she would be, not because the world would change, but because she would. Ethan comes inside quietly. He doesn't ask what I'm writing. He never does anymore. He just looks at me, and somehow that's enough. There's a small smile on his lips, the kind that says he's thinking about something good. He places his hand on my shoulder, warm and steady. "You okay?" he asks softly. I nod. "Just finishing something I started a long time ago." He looks down at the letter, then at me. "Then finish it," he says. "And let it go." When he leaves, I stare at the paper again. For a long time, I thought closure would come from erasing what I'd done, but I know now it comes from remembering, without letting the memory own me. I add one last line. "I loved you then, I love you now. And I'll love you in every quiet tomorrow we have left." I fold the letter, slip it into an envelope, but I don't seal it. Instead, I place it inside the old wooden box that holds years of our life together, photographs, postcards, little fragments of who we were. I slide it between a faded picture of our wedding day and a seashell from our first vacation. Maybe one day Ella will find it and understand that her parents weren't perfect, but they tried. They loved, they failed, they forgave. Outside, the sun is setting, that golden kind of light that turns everything soft and forgiving. I walk out to the porch and sit beside Ethan. He doesn't say anything, and neither do I. We don't need words anymore. We've spent a lifetime talking through silence. The sky burns orange, then pink, then slowly fades into blue. I rest my head against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, I feel completely at peace. If life is a circle, then maybe this is where ours completes, not in revenge, not in regret, but in understanding. The storm that once tore us apart has left behind calm waters. And in those waters, I see the reflection of who we've become, two people who weathered everything and still found their way home. Later that night, when I climb into bed, I glance at the small wooden box on the shelf. The letter is there, waiting, like a quiet guardian of all the words I never spoke. I turn off the light and whisper into the dark, "Thank you, Ethan, for staying." And somewhere, I think I hear his voice, low, gentle, almost like a dream. "I never left, Clara. I was just waiting for you to come back."